The day after Governor Cuomo apologized in the wake of 3 women accusing him of sexual harassment, the New York tabloids, they're not buying it. The New York Post, not surprisingly, mocking the governor, showing a picture of him touching the cheeks of one of the accusers. The Daily News, which is usually more supportive to Cuomo, it had the headline "Crocodile Tears," basically saying he's full of it. The New York Times, a bit more tame, its headline, "Cuomo, contrite over sexual harassment accusations, refuses to resign." I'm going to be speaking with the co-writer of that piece in a second, but first, let's show you what the papers are talking about.
I now understand that I acted in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. It was unintentional, and I truly and deeply apologize for it. I feel awful about it, and frankly, I am embarrassed by it. And that's not easy to say, but that's the truth.
And for more, let's bring in our guest, Luis Ferré Sadurní. He covers New York State politics for the Times. Luis, thanks. And by now, people are either going to reach their own conclusions or they'll at least wait for the Attorney General's report. But what I'm curious is what's happening behind the scenes. And, you know, for folks who don't follow it as closely, there's limited political seats at the top of the political pyramid in New York. And with both Senators Gillibrand and Schumer not going anywhere anytime soon, there's a lot of Democrats who'd like to be governor right now. How is that playing out in terms of who may join the limited ranks of Democrats who say the governor's got to go? How are political motivations part of this calculus?
Yeah, thanks for having me. You know, we saw leading up to his apology yesterday a small but growing group of state lawmakers who are Democrats. Some of them have been frequent critics of the governor. Others are from more moderate suburban districts, coming out and saying that the governor should step down. In the meantime, I think, you know, the governor's office is probably bracing for potential new allegations to surface and see how they weather that and how those allegations, you know, change the political calculus for some of our top leaders in the state, you know, how they handle the situation.
I was speaking with your colleague Jesse yesterday, and I said, I used to cover Albany pretty closely. When there was a scandal that broke or when there was a huge corruption probe, you know, you had a whiff of it before the allegations came down because you heard through the rumor mill. I got to tell you, Cuomo's been in Albany for 40 years. And, you know, Jesse said he had heard rumblings of this. I hadn't. Doesn't mean that I'm right. But were people shocked at what the allegations that came down, given, not that Cuomo doesn't have a temper, but he's a calculated guy, and he's spoken out on the issue of harassment in detail over the years, and he's held elected officials, I remember when he did this with Schneiderman, to account without any gray area. Were people shocked that Cuomo's name is attached to this kind of behavior?
I think it really depends who you ask. I've spoken to some former staffers who used to work in his office, and while, you know, a lot of them said they never necessarily saw anything or heard anything, they said that they found the accounts of the women that have come forward believable. And these are people that worked in on the second floor and near the governor for a few years. Having said that, you know, I think what sparked this, if you trace it all the way back, it was sort of an erosion of the fear factor that the governor had created, right? We've reported about how the governor is known to issue verbal attacks and threats and retribution and the late night calls to lean on someone to get his way. And that we saw an erosion on that when Ron Kim, the Queens Democrat Assemblyman, comes out and gives his account of a threatening call he said he got from the governor. And I think that started to open up the floodgates.
It seems, Luis, that within the inner circle of Cuomo, that they looked at Governor Northam in Virginia, albeit a completely different set of circumstances. But a year ago, people thought, he was dead man walking politically, and he wasn't going to be able to survive that scandal wearing blackface years ago. But a year later, he's in a completely different place. Are they delusional that time might, fog memories here? Or are they right that, just as long as there's not more bombshells, not only can he survive this, and I saw some polls out today that showed the public still hasn't convicted him in at least a court of public opinion.
I think some people you speak to will say that if there is one politician who might take a page from the Ralph Northam book, it is Andrew Cuomo. I'm sure in the coming days, we're in an important period in Albany right now, state budget negotiations. I'm sure they're going to try to use that to their advantage and get some significant wins out of those negotiations. He's lobbed some popular proposals like legalizing recreational marijuana and whatnot, and they might want to try to point to that to try to change the topic of conversation a bit. Reopening the state, of course, vaccination efforts are ramping up. But again, like I said, I think, and I think you've mentioned this before, there's speculation in New York that if one or two or more serious allegations start to come up, that could start changing the political dynamics. Maybe it could, influence some of the bigger names in the Democratic Party to start calling for his resignation even before we have a state attorney general report.
Obviously, there has been some denials on the governor's part, but he hasn't denied the allegation made by Ms. Bennett. And I'm curious, and there's no way of knowing for sure, but from the folks that you've spoken to that are close to the governor, do they believe that the contrition is because he may have gotten caught, or is the contrition because he didn't really realize what he did was so out of bounds?
I think it's hard to say at the moment. I mean, what is clear is that the women who accused him didn't buy his apology. They saw it more as a non-apology. I will say, I'm sure some New Yorkers would have heard him or seen him and believe that he was genuine, right? You could at times see his voice crack, and this is a governor who is not known to show remorse or regret. And there he was facing the cameras, saying that he was embarrassed and that he was sorry and that he apologized. Having said that, right, you gotta take a look at what exactly he was apologizing for. One thing he hasn't done is deny what, for example, one of his accusers, Charlotte Bennett, said that he said, right? She said that the governor asked her whether she was monogamous, whether she had sex with older men. The governor hasn't denied those remarks. So there are still questions that reporters have and want to ask the governor about the allegations out there. And one other thing that Charlotte Bennett's lawyer, Deborah Katz, pointed out yesterday is that Ms. Bennett reported her interactions with the governor to her supervisor, and there were conversations about how she felt and what the governor had told her. And she got transferred to another job in the administration before eventually leaving. So their lawyers argue that presumably the governor knew about this, and they said they're prepared to prove that they didn't handle her allegation, her complaint, the way it should have been handled.
As I say, there's many more acts to this play to go here, but I appreciate your time with us today, Luis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, from New York, we head down to Texas, where the crisis far from over, with many people still dealing with water issues, massive electric bills now. But could all of the pain and the suffering have actually been avoided? After the break, I'm going to be speaking with one of the top reporters in Texas. He says the answer to the question is yes.